Welcome to the BMI Podcast.
Welcome.
Today, me and Mikey, we're going to delve into resistance training and just other modalities and stuff like that within the range of the resistance training world. And I'm just going to ask you a few questions, one for myself, for my own personal training, but also maybe from a, beginner, intermediate, sort of expert type of approach as well. We'll probably get into it later on in there, and probably like we were talking earlier on today, might be a part one because you said you said you could talk about this for hours, so
Let's steer it in the direction and let's get going.
Yeah, we'll steer it in the direction, eh?
What maybe as a bit of a background and stuff, like what are your main goals from strength at the moment?
Well, that's what I'm going to get into. So pretty much what I would like to do is probably talk to you first, give us a little bit of a guideline on your background from the resistance training world, sort of give us a little bit of a timeline and your background, and then we'll go from there.
For sure. So I mean, I started resistance training back in high school. Like it probably would have been, I'd say around year 12. And kind of got into it. I mean, mainly because I was always small. Yep. And so because I was always small, it was like, well, if I can't go up, I got to go out.
Yeah.
And so it was just a matter of trying to, I always had a fascination with like bodybuilders like Jay Cutler and not necessarily Ronnie Coleman, but around that same kind of time era.
Yeah.
Jay Cutler would have been Flex Wheeler and Lee Labrada, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Frank Zane.
Yeah.
That kind of old school bodybuilder. And I always was fascinated.
Was that the start? They were the first ones.
Yeah, so I think when I got into it, Jay Cutler was Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
So it was him, and then obviously a few of the guys just before him that were still pictured in the magazines and whatnot, when you could still get magazines back in those days.
Yeah.
And so it was always like, looking at those guys because they were just like freaks, like huge.
Yeah.
And there was just this fascination, almost like superhero fascination with that type of physique. And so got into resistance training quite early. And I mean, for as long as I can remember, I've kind of always wanted to be a PT.
Yeah.
And this was even back in high school. And so kind of I followed down that path and went and did, like I think I said in the nutrition one, an undergrad in sport and exercise science. So I could go and work in the gym, and then went and did a postgrad in sport nutrition, sport psychology, and exercise phys. And so that kind of is the education background in terms of what I'd done from in an education standpoint, but that kind of worked into basically working in the gym. I've probably been in the gym for, I think what we talked about, like almost coming up 15 years probably. It's just short of 15 years because of 31 now, so I would have got into the gym probably around 18, working in a gym at around 18.
Yep.
And so since then I've always kind of been involved in fitness of some description. For the most part, like I've always steered towards more of the hypertrophy element, which is kind of building of muscle size, rather than necessarily just absolute strength. But from the physiology background, there's still a lot of study that's gone on with regards to strength development and just muscle in general. And it was probably 2016 that I competed in bodybuilding. And so I've done a couple of bodybuilding comps locally and up in Auckland as well. So I mean, like probably for the good part of half my life, I've been involved in resistance training of some kind. Yeah. Both in terms of just actually an education perspective, whereas that's kind of my passion, as well as actually just being in and going to the gym at the same time. Yeah.
What does your resistance training look like nowadays?
A lot less.
Yep.
A lot less. I mean, resistance training probably, I'd say like a push-pull legs, like it'd be pretty standard push-pull legs kind of split. Mainly hypertrophy. Yeah. So a lot of it will often depend on the goal in which that you're obviously going about. Me personally, it's purely about hypertrophy. And so just doing reps in a range that's kind of conducive towards building muscle. Yeah. Now, that range is quite broad. And so when we think about trying to build muscle, so long as you take the muscle or the exercise to failure, you're essentially in that kind of hypertrophy range. But, you can look at anywhere realistically between somewhere around that 8 to 20 rep range is classified as hypertrophy. But like I said, you can obviously push that being a little bit lower and kind of tailor more that towards strength or muscle endurance. As long as you get close to failure, the muscle will still adapt. But most of my training is centered purely around just, I think classic bodybuilder. Like I was a bodybuilder back in 15 years old, and I enjoy bodybuilding now. Yeah. So it's just a bodybuilder type resistance training.
Yeah.
Nothing crazy. So nothing like I said, nothing like powerlifting, nothing like CrossFit or trying to do ollie lifts and things like that. Yep. Or trying to max out in terms of just pure rep maxes. Mm-hmm. Although that has kind of been a phase somewhere along my journey.
Yep.
It's just not really where I'm at now. And now it's just bodybuilding I find is good because it can at least, you can continue to do it for almost an indefinite period of time. You know, it's nothing crazy to a point where your joints are just going to be all over the place and hurting and kind of putting excess load through your joints, as opposed to bodybuilding. It's a little bit more lower intensity and you can get away with doing a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, I mean, traditionally, mostly around the hypertrophy kind of stuff. So just, I think classic resistance training.
I can get you to come too close to the mic. So, yeah. I've got a note here, like for progressive overload. You know, you talked about it a little bit before. Like, go into that in a bit more detail for those around there, like, and how important it is to resistance training and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of any kind of exercise physiology, so if you're wanting to improve anything, it doesn't matter whether that is in resistance training or whether that's in cardiovascular fitness, flexibility or mobility. Won't matter, you'll need to progressively overload. So the concept is simply do more.
Yeah.
Right? For the body to adapt, it needs excess stress. It needs something else to push it beyond where it's currently at. And so progressive overload is just a terminology of essentially meaning over time, try to do a little bit more.
Yep.
Right? Progressively overload. Now, there's a principle of recovery to a point where if you do too much in any given period of time, you're going to need too much recovery time, and so you'll miss that kind of optimal time in which you can keep progressing. So progressive overload is the principle in which that you can essentially continue to make small progress without pushing your body to a limit where it's then going to require too much time to actually recover and come back to baseline. From a resistance training perspective, you're essentially looking at any metric or any variable that you can basically do more in. So that could be in reps, that could be in sets, that could be decreased rest time, that could be more time under tension, that could be more weight. Essentially any of those variables, if you manipulate them to a point at which that you're doing more than what you did last time, is essentially progressive overload. In order to adapt, and like I said, it doesn't matter whether that's resistance from strength, doesn't matter if it is the goal is to try and build muscle mass or whether or not you're trying to improve your fitness. You will need some form of progressive overload in a given training block in order to see progression. And so quite often what we'll end up doing is, have you heard of like a macro or a mesocycle?
No.
So essentially it's have you heard of periodization? Yep. So periodization is essentially just the breaking down of a training year or a training block, typically in a year. But I mean, Olympic athletes will use a 4-year block because Olympics come around every 4 years. Periodization, you're essentially just segmenting out a training or different training phases and different training blocks. So for any given training block, you want to see some type of progressive overload within that block. And then you also want to see some progressive overload in the context of the year. And so at each point, doesn't matter where you're looking in the training cycle or what you're currently doing, there should be some kind of progression. And that could be as detailed as if you had like a program going with someone and they might be tracking reps and sets and things like that. Or it could just be the concept of, well, I know at the start of the year I did 4 sets of 10 at 60 kilos and now I can do 4 sets of 10 at 80 kilos. Right?
So like for that there, like would you say like taking notes or something like that is quite important to make sure that you're, I guess, following a program or staying on track?
I think in the early stages. So when I was...
Because I find myself now like, I probably tracked it a lot more when I was younger. And now I was like, now I know sort of my weight. So that's sort of what I want to get into later on today is like, I want to improve my strength like immensely. I've got a few goals that I want to hit just out of, I don't know, maybe just pure curiosity. Like, fuck, can I get there? Can I build to that point? Like, one of mine is three plates each side on the bench.
Yeah.
I can do 110, which I think is
1.5 or 2.5.
and a 5 on the end. Yeah. So that's maybe one of my goals, and then also like I don't know. I'm not doing deadlifts or anything like that because of my back issues that I've been having, but sort of other strengths, maybe something like walking lunges, maybe with some weight and stuff like that.
Yep.
Try to get that up because I can do lunges. They're not really hurting me as much as it's hurting me for squats and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're first starting out, it's probably good to track.
Yep.
Because that way you're not overreaching too fast either. You can see what you did last time. You can kind of actually progressively overload. Like I was saying, rather than kind of jumping from point A to point B, and that point A to point B is just such a large discrepancy that you can't really recover in time.
Yep.
To do another session. And so, I mean, I think between the ages of probably 17 and maybe 22, I tracked almost every single workout. Like I just had this black books, like just literally filled with workouts. And I look back and I'm like, holy shit, like, if I continued in that progression even to where I'm at now, like I've been like, holy crap, like it's probably huge progress. And so if you're looking to see progress in strength fast, and or just progress in the gym fast, I would likely say it would be good to have like those written down somewhere. At the moment, I mean, again, it is completely context dependent of the goal, right? Like if your goal is kind of, you just want to turn up to the gym and you just want to like build a bit of muscle over time, do you need to track everything? Probably not. So long as you have a gauge. And I think the more you train, the more general gauge like I know I can go and do an incline dumbbell. I'll probably warm up at 22. I'll do my first set at 28. Then I'll go 30, 34, 36.
Yeah.
And then I'm pretty much good. Like, sure, could I continue to keep going? If I got a spotter, I might go for a 40.
Yeah.
Whereas
I'm in the same boat there. I'm definitely this year's been pretty good, and like, well, because I've been cutting and I've been holding on to the strength, so that's why I'm actually quite happy while cutting, actually holding on to relatively only losing, I think maybe like 5% of my strength, which is pretty huge considering the deficit that I was in,
and the amount of weight lost as well.
That's too as well. I'm noticing that for the back I was just like, oh shit, like this is heavy now, like being
except
lighter.
Pull-ups.
Except for pull-ups, can smash the pull-ups now.
Exactly.
But you know what I mean, like the lat pull down or something like that. I can feel. I was just like, all right, but now I know. It's like, okay, that means that you got to push now because, or else you're gonna lose that strength if you're not gonna train at that same level. So I've been trying to hold that for as long as possible, but there's always going to be some give.
There's going to be some that's going to drop off.
And
I mean, like, I think if you're wanting to go into a phase now where you prioritize strength more, it would be worth tracking things. Purely because then you can see those numbers and you can see more particular the sets and the reps that you did. And especially if you assign an RPE with that, you can see how close you are to failure. Because a lot of the times, like when you're first getting into an exercise, you'll see weight progression quite quickly. Now, the more you train, the less weight progression you're actually going to see. And so everything just starts to slow down. Whereas really at that point, RPE is probably a little bit better.
So RPE for the listeners out there?
Rating of perceived exertion. Which is basically just you can pick 1 to 10. I think the actual limit is 11 to 20, which is just a random range to go for. So 1 to 10 is easier. 1 being this was easy, 10 being literally you couldn't get it up and someone else would have had to help you. If you track your RPE, and it's pretty good, like the percentage of intensity, so the closer you are to failure, whether you're running or doing resistance training, RPE is almost closer than almost any other metric. Even heart rate to a certain degree, because you know how hard this feels. Especially when you've done it a bit.
It's your gauge.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Like you really only have to go to failure once to know what that feels like. Everything beyond that, you can kind of get a gauge. Oh, this is about an 8. I had 2 reps left in the tank. So RPE, especially if you're tracking RPE at a given weight, you'll be able to see the progression that you're getting because it'll start to feel easier and you'll have a few more reps in the tank. You'll be able to see that progression probably a little bit quicker than that will be the prerequisite to seeing the weight then go up. So I just find it's good to, especially if the goal is strength, just to track the numbers to make sure that you're actually, one, hitting the same number as what you should be doing. And you can also work off percentages of that. So going in and doing like a 1 to 5 rep max on whatever exercise you want to get stronger in, and then using percentages based off that to kind of gauge the intensity. So much like, you know, I was talking to you about the heart rate stuff with running. So running at a certain percentage of your heart rate.
Yeah, yep.
Similar with strength. You want to be using a percentage of whatever your maximum is to actually build strength rather than just try and max out every time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Cool. How did you set goals when it came to resistance training, like over the years, and what was it like for you? Was it were they ego driven or was it functionality? You know, like give us a little.
So I mean, a lot of when it came to resistance, I think a lot of the resistance training goals that I set were almost the resistance training was a subset of another goal. Like the goal was always to build muscle.
Yeah.
And so, especially in a physique sport, if you want to call it a sport, or like, you know, you if you're doing bodybuilding, no one gives a shit how much you lift. Like it.
Yeah.
You could be standing on stage and you have a 100 kilo bench press or a 60 kilo bench press or a 200 kilo bench press. It makes no fucking difference. Like, what do you look like on stage?
Yeah.
And so really, for me, the actual goal was all around the aesthetic. And so it was more of the vanity goal than necessarily anything to do with the actual training element, because the training was just the tool in which that I had to use to achieve the physique.
Yep.
And so it was more, were there certain muscle groups that I needed to bring up in order to create the image that I was looking for?
Yeah.
And so if there was, then more of my total training volume, which is basically the amount of work done, so sets and reps.
Yeah.
As much work is done as possible, or more work done in those muscle groups as opposed to other muscle groups.
Yeah.
Now, I think I went through a strength phase probably like once, and I would have been like probably 18 to 22, so that high testosterone, try and build ego years kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where I really tried to kind of build a bit of strength, and there it was breaking it down into just exercises.
Yep.
So in contrast to bodybuilding, where it was all about the muscle group and how the muscle looked, that was more centered around the actual exercise. So it's really just about picking the exercises that are important to you, that you want to improve upon. I mean, yeah, sure, some of them are definitely ego lifts, like regardless whether it's bench press, curl, or bloody deadlift. Like a lot of the times, if you're wanting a good number, of course it's going to be ego oriented.
Yeah.
But I think you just pick the ones that are important to you. For me, deadlift was never that important.
Yeah.
I never really did it.
Same.
I got good at squat. I got relatively good for my body weight at bench, but deadlift, didn't really care. Like I'll just do a Romanian deadlift rather than a conventional deadlift with bent knees. So it didn't really matter.
Yep.
So I just picked exercises, I guess, that were important to me. And so I picked certain exercises, the ones that were, I don't know, depending on what phase I was in. So if I was watching people and they were doing more powerlifting movements, I'd probably do bench and squat, and I'd normally throw in a pull-up. Do you know the online coach?
The online coach? No.
So he was kind of like one of the OG tracking your macros back in the day, and would have been.
I thought you were going to bring up Greg Plitt.
Yeah.
You know, because I remember you going through those stages, and that I guess that was coming after Running Common, and then they went more. What was it called? Sport models.
It's
What
like
were they?
fitness model,
Fitness models. Yeah. Like always on the covers of Sports Health and stuff like that. I remember you going through those.
Yeah. Like Greg Plitt, he would have been like one of the original like YouTube vloggers.
Yeah.
Where he would put up videos on his website and his workout videos and things like that.
He was huge too.
Yeah. Massive following.
Crazy, like the two guys that probably were paving the way ended up passing old Ziz and Greg Plitt. You know, like
100%.
Those two slightly different spaces, but you know, like crazy.
Yeah, pushing the way through. And I mean, again, like that was probably prior to 21. So like, yeah, there would have been a bit of strength involved when I was like looking at those guys and following along with those guys, but it would have been more about the aesthetic.
Yeah.
And so the training that I had, or the goals that I had, was more around the aesthetic, and the training was just a means to achieve the aesthetic.
Yeah.
Then it came into, okay, well now, like, I've had a few years of training under my belt. Let's try and actually get some strength going. And so then it flipped into, I can't remember which guys it was, but definitely the online coach was one after that.
Yeah.
And he had a bodybuilder powerlifter background. So I looked at that and I was like, yeah, like he's got really good technique, but really strong for that good technique. He was a little guy. He was probably only like 5'6" as well.
Yeah.
Little Asian dude, and I was like, cool. So like modeled a lot of the training based off that.
What was his name?
The online coach.
No, but what was his name?
Raymond Querido. He's like
okay.
a Filipino.
I think I know.
He's one of the OGs. Like,
yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
You probably know him just like
If I saw
face
his
and things.
videos, yeah, I'm pretty sure I know that.
Yeah. But anyway, he had a bodybuilder and powerlifting background. So a lot of the strength, when I had strength goals, it was based off that. And so the main movements were essentially bench press, overhead press, squat, and pull up.
Yep.
And so for me, those were the exercises. And again, instead of focusing on the muscle group, it was just focusing around those movements.
Yeah.
And so
I'm kind of like that at the moment as well, other than squat, to be honest.
And I mean, to start with, it's just figuring out actually where you are. So where's your current strength capacity? And like I said, the easiest way to do that is to do either a 1 to a 5 RM, which is just the maximum amount of weight that you can lift for 1 to 5 reps.
Yep.
If you have a spotter, 1 to 3. If you don't have a spotter, 3 to 5.
Yeah.
It's easy to get there. If you don't have a spotter, pick dumbbells rather than a bar, or set something up so that if you fail, you can still get out rather than become a gym meme.
Yeah.
And then
great advice, bro. Or smash your phone.
Or smash your phone. Done that a few times. You essentially just have to pick where you're at, right? So once you know where you're at, then you can essentially use those percentages, like I was saying, to train strength and build progressive overload into a 8, 12, 16 week, however you want to do program, so that you see that progression over that period of time. And so then you retest. Whereas most people kind of go into the gym and they want to get stronger, and so they just hit 1 rep every single time. And they fail every single time. And it's like going out and doing sprints all the time. Like you won't get better at doing distance or building the capacity if you just max out every time. You need to slowly build that up over time using progressive overload. And like I said, a lot of that just ends up becoming training at a slightly lower percentage and building progressive overload throughout 8 to 10 weeks.
Mainly some of my goals are just linked for me towards like just seeing how hard or how far I can push my body, and even just this year it's kind of been like, shit, the body is capable of more than I thought. And that's why I'm sort of thinking like, fuck it, I'm gonna keep running. I'm gonna try and bench press like 3 plates, while holding like maybe decent like half marathon pace or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like just I'm gonna get there. I'm working towards it. I'm not there now, but I'm just thinking like, oh, why not shoot for that at least? You know what I mean? Like that's sort of where I'm heading at towards with my resistance training. That's sort of what I am leaning towards, is trying to actually, all right, what can I push myself like boundary wise, hold on to the strength. And that's why I thought I'd maybe ask you like, what would you recommend for someone like, it's like, I know I'll probably do a bit too much, and I actually haven't even told you I didn't go for a run yesterday because my knee is pretty beat up. And then I went, but then I was like, oh well, I can do legs at the gym then, because I normally would avoid gym on Monday. Went in and inflamed it a bit more.
I was gonna say, how's it feeling?
I went for a walk today instead of a bike ride as well, because I was like, all right, fuck, I need to chill out.
Just pull it back a little bit.
Pull it back.
I think
I'll recover like a bit,
100%.
but it's just sort of like, I was like, oh yeah.
It's inflamed and the inflammation will go down, but just don't keep inflaming it. Then it becomes tendonitis. I mean, essentially, so what you're looking at when you have, it's called, what's the type? It's like, it's hybrid training. It's hybrid training. But
I was going to ask you about that, what you think of that, because
there's another word that's called, and I'll find it for you, where they use that to study it. Whereas it's essentially like conflicting goals, right? So basically, you've got
but my goals aren't like, I'm not trying to be a power lifter or a bodybuilder. Like, do you know what I mean? So I kind of like things like, I'm not going that crazy. Too conflicting.
The physiological parameters still means that they conflict. Because the body to adapt. Have you heard of the specificity principle?
No.
So one principle of training is progressive overload. Another one is specificity.
Okay.
Specificity is basically training for what you want your body to adapt in. Now, resistance training makes sense, right? If you want to be a bodybuilder, train like a bodybuilder. If you want to be a marathon runner, train like a marathon runner. If don't train like a bodybuilder if you want to be a marathon runner.
Exactly.
if typically if you're getting adaptation at the muscle level from resistance training is different to getting adaptation in the muscle from an endurance perspective.
Yeah.
So when it comes to endurance, you're really trying to improve your mitochondrial capacity. So you're trying to push these little cells in the muscle to be efficient at using energy.
Mm-hmm.
Strength is about the brain sending signals to the muscles to fire more of those muscle.
Yep.
So you'll have heaps of like little neurons from the brain that'll go down to the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain's job, in order to exert a lot of force, which is strength, is to send more of those signals to the muscle so you can actually recruit more fibers. A lot of times you'll fail not necessarily because like you don't have the muscle to fail, but because the brain's not sending enough signal to the muscle to actually use that.
Yep.
Whereas adapting to endurance training is different. It's got nothing really to do with the brain sending the signal to the muscle, except for sprinting. So sprinting does. As much as it does about working you remember nucleus at school? You know, when you did science and there's like a little nucleus, which is kind of like the information center of like the cell itself.
Yep.
Around there, you've got what's called the mitochondria,
which
essentially is just like, that's what's responsible for generating energy. So every cell in your body will have a mitochondria or multiple mitochondria. And essentially it's how efficient is that at producing energy, which is what makes you fitter.
Yeah, I'm hearing that word all the time in reels now. Like
Mitochondria?
Yeah, mitochondria. Yeah. Mitochondria. They're always talking about it, you know.
So it's essentially, you read textbooks and it's like one line that's pretty much synonymous in every single textbook you read, which is it's the powerhouse of the cell.
Yeah.
And that powerhouse of the cell is literally, like I said, think of like Huntley Power Station.
Yeah.
Like it's generating all this energy, right? Or even like those power station lines just up the road from us.
Mm-hmm.
Generating energy, that's literally the mitochondria inside your cell.
Yeah.
And it's just generating your energy. So every time you need to produce energy, that's the mitochondria doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the more efficient that you are at that, the fitter you are.
Yep.
And so the kind of perk to zone 2 is you're really right in the line at how much the mitochondria can process fat before tipping into using carbohydrate.
Mm-hmm.
So by training different systems, you're actually getting different outcomes.
Yeah.
And so, but all of that requires energy and all of that requires a recovery capacity. So think of your recovery capacity like a cup full of water, right? Now, if you put in half of that cup of resistance training and half of that cup with cardiovascular exercise, you're filling the cup, but you've only got half and half.
Yeah.
Whereas if you put all of it in from resistance training, you've filled that cup with resistance training, you can obviously get more recovery capacity from it through resistance training.
Yeah.
But you've limited the amount of cardiovascular effort that you can actually put in. So by putting in more or doing both at the same time, you kind of limit the other because you can only fill up a cup so much before it just overflows.
Yeah.
And that was our progressive overload principle.
That's my knee.
There we go. That's the knee. And so essentially it's picking, how I would do it anyways, is breaking it down so you've got certain phases that you're focusing on certain things. That's not to say you can't do both at the same time.
Yeah, one's maybe at a 70-30 sort of principle.
Correct.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, you're really looking at progression in one while maintaining the other.
Yeah.
And then looking to progress in the other while maintaining the former.
I think that's literally what I've gone through the last week or two. It's just like, okay, now I've kind of tried to go back into amping up my gym sessions and then trying to maintain and amping up a little bit of my running. And it literally, I was trying to go for another 15K and I was like, I got around like K11. I was just like, oh, it's not feeling good. And I was like, there's 4Ks left. And I was like, okay, so I just fucking cruised home. Cruised home. I was like, I was not going to do that. And then...
And you would have done that. You would have actually done that while you were increasing your running, right?
Yeah.
So your resistance training, like you would not have been progressing much in strength because you would have been putting more of your energy into the running. Yeah. And it would have just happened by nature. Like you didn't probably try to not progress in strength, but you just, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And part of that obviously was calories. And
I thought I got extra calories. I got more output. Let's go.
Yeah. And you do, but you're still operating from a 3/4 full cup.
Yeah.
And so you can still really only fill that cup with an extra quarter.
Mm.
And it's where do you want to put that extra quarter?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, for a lot of the times for me, it's just identifying what is the priority now. And so that is where your potential periodization could come into play.
Yeah.
Breaking down that year into, okay, well, the start of the year has been fitness.
Yep.
This middle part of the year could be strength. And then you could do the final third of the year being fitness again.
Yeah.
And you might find that you could do it into quarters, like it won't make a difference.
Yeah.
And just split it up, 8, 10, 12, 16 weeks long. For that period of time, I'll focus on X.
Yeah.
But typically, it's easier to see the progression. It's much like trying to build muscle and lose fat at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, you can do both, but you're probably subpar in both of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And so, can you see strength? 100%. And can you see improvements in fitness? 100%. It's just, I guess, being more realistic with then what you would expect to see in return.
Yeah.
If you did both at the same time versus if you did a priority of one over the other.
Yeah.
For a period of time.
Okay. So basically, make my mind up.
Basically. This is where I struggled for so long. Like, I always wanted to, more from a remaining lean, like I always wanted to build muscle and stay lean.
Yeah.
And I stayed lean, but to the detriment of building muscle.
Yeah.
I could have built significant...
you probably you definitely gained for sure, but it was just...
That was over a 10-year period.
Something like that, yeah.
Like, most people wouldn't have seen it, or they only saw it because I hibernated for about 5 years, and then they saw the before and after of hibernation. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, there's muscle going to be there in 5 years.
Yeah.
But if you saw me on a 6-monthly basis, you wouldn't have noticed a hell of a lot of difference.
Yeah.
And sure, now that's fine, but it definitely limited the amount of muscle that I would have built over the past 10 years, purely because I also wanted to remain lean. And if
you pro bulking? Are you?
No, I'm still. I think for most people, unless they want to go into the sport of bodybuilding, there's no need to bulk. Yeah, it's still a complete waste of time. Yeah, like excessively gaining mass,
too much fat, and
pretty much,
little to no muscle actually gained.
Pretty much, but to a point where if you're competing in bodybuilding and you want to maximize the amount of muscle that you're building.
Yeah, you go.
You kind of got
that comes with the sacrifice. Yeah,
pretty much.
So I've actually touched on it. Like, would you recommend training programs and stuff like that for resistance training? And like, what would a beginner resistance training program sort of start looking at? Maybe we've got a bit of time now. I would say like maybe go through a beginner sort of phase, and then maybe an intermediate, and then what. If you're trying to get after certain goals for the experts and stuff like that.
I mean, when it comes to breaking down into a program, like I think if you're new to resistance training, it's better to have a program than to not have a program. If you have a specific goal like strength, it's better to have a program than not have a program. Yeah. If you're just trying to build muscle, it really makes no difference. Yeah. It doesn't matter what you do. Is like I said, as long as you get close to failure with the exercises that you're selecting, you'll build muscle. Yeah. Now, the program helps to confine what you do. So if you don't have a program, and let's say your proclivity is to do excess amount of work, the program inhibits you from doing the work. Yeah. It puts you into a box to say, just do this. Yeah. Rather than, when I was younger, I would always like add. And I'd have like 10 exercises, 3 to 5 sets each, and I'm doing like fucking ridiculous amount of work. It's like,
I trained with one of the bros the other day, and I did literally 3 bicep exercises, and then I was just like, because I was like, well, what do you mean I don't need to do anything else? Yeah. It's like I'm just going like this, bro, in a different way every time.
Yeah.
Like
I've already hit failure probably on the first exercise, and now everything's just like you're wasting your time, right? Whereas,
but at the end of it, like, we're dead, but it's just like, like you don't need to get too fancy with some of the stuff.
No, and like I said, a lot of the times, depending how long you've been training for, if you put a newbie into that, that's probably too much. Yeah. So they've actually gone from, like I said, that recovery capacity, that progressive overload, outside the scope. Yeah. And so now the volume and the work done was so high that now you need 5 days to recover before you get back up. But yet, really, you kind of want to be hitting the muscle every few days. Yeah. Like it's about 72 hours where you get back up. Well, ideally, you come back up to baseline so you can hit it. If you miss that 72-hour mark, typically you start dropping below the recovery threshold again.
Yeah.
And so then if you're still taking 5 days to recover, you've missed the mark, and then you train again, you only come back up to baseline.
Yeah.
So you don't really get that progress.
Yeah.
As opposed to, so like, I think from a beginner standpoint, do as little as possible that will allow you to be able to turn up the next day and keep going.
Yeah.
So regardless of what that is, a lot of times full body or upper lower is quite normal. Because again, like you can pull back on the amount of work that they're doing, the amount of sets and reps that you're doing in a given session.
Yep.
So that you can essentially turn up in 2 days' time and do the same muscle group.
Yeah.
Most people train and then they're still sore 5 days later and they can't go back and train. And so then if the goal is to just stimulate the muscle and stimulate the muscle, you're missing that stimulating the muscle. You've just overstimulated the muscle and too much time to recover.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, if you end up going to the more intermediate to advanced lifter, they could do a session, and that might be like just a pure chest session. Within 2 days, they're fine. You know, their chest isn't sore, they're kind of good to go, they feel fine, and so they can hit bench press again, right?
Yep.
And so they're ready to kind of go. Now, again, you're looking if there's a muscle group or an exercise that you want to progress in, ideally hit it every third day or so.
Yep.
Every third to fourth day probably is a good principle. From a set perspective, you're kind of looking around, and a lot of these principles, like, they're quite general, but the generality works.
Yeah.
And so each of us has a recovery capacity, but as long as you hit roughly around about, I think it's the minimum or the maximum recoverable volume is up to around about 20 to 25 sets per week.
Yeah.
So the maximum amount of volume or total work that you can do while still being able to recover is around about 25 to 30 sets per week, let's say, maximum. Minimum, probably around 10.
Yeah.
So you could do as little as 10.
Because isn't there a old bodybuilder that does one set? What's his name?
So Dorian, I think it's Dorian Yates or Mike Mensa.
Mike Mensa, that's it. Yeah,
But
he's the one that just
but
do
it's
one
not-
set till failure, like
Yeah.
it's never ending,
Yeah.
like and just keep going.
It'll be one set till failure, but he still does a lot of sets.
Yeah.
So he'll do probably, you need roughly around 3 to 4 warm-up sets to even get close to that.
Yeah.
And then he just doesn't count them.
Yeah.
So he's still doing like 4 or 5
Yeah,
sets.
he's still
He just doesn't count the warm-up sets.
and then it's just
And then
all
he-
about the failure set.
Yeah. Which
okay.
which is good principle.
Which is pretty much
What you should be roughly doing
Yeah.
anyway.
it's a progressive overload.
Essentially. It's just it sounds cool because it's like, well, you only have to do one set.
Yeah.
It's like, there's a bit of context to that one set.
Yeah.
But essentially, again, as long as you get close to failure. Now, this is purely based on muscle building.
Yeah.
So if you want to build muscle, anywhere from 10 sets per week per muscle group, all the way up to 25 to 30 sets per muscle group per week can work. So over the course of your 8-10 week program, you could just start at the lower end of that, 10 to 12, and slowly build it up close to 20 to 30.
Yeah.
And as long as you see progression within there, really the only difference between an intermediate and an advanced lifter is the amount of time that they've done. And so their recovery capacity is probably just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Their proficiency with movement is a bit better. So they're just a bit smoother when they do the movement, and they probably know how close to failure they are better compared to someone that's more novice.
Yeah.
But there's not really a hell of a lot of difference in terms of the actual training itself.
Yeah.
Slightly different when we come to like strength and building strength, because again, the novice lifter hasn't experienced that failure.
Yeah.
And they need time in order to build up tension on the load and tendons and things. So don't get sore knee.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to building muscle, like I said, bodybuilding is more for longevity anyway. And so you're using a weight that's such a lower percentage that doesn't do too much inflammation.
Yeah.
And so you've got a little bit more leeway to work with. And so really, as long as you hit anywhere between kind of 10 and 30 sets per week, ideally that's progressively overloaded. So getting a little bit more over the course of an 8 to 10 week period, you're in the ballpark.
Yeah.
And at least one of those sets where you go to failure, you're pretty good. Like it's pretty general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. I was sort of thinking like maybe just for the listeners out there, do you have any like old sort of programs maybe that you have laying around? Like if the listeners out there want a basic program, maybe drop us a comment.
I can.
And then we can email it to you or something like that, or just
Yeah, 100%. I'll
just to add a little bit of extra value for us, just an old one you got lying around, just for some people that might be just in that beginner stage sort of thing. And then they could be like me. I sort of like, there's so much stuff going around right now. It's like, oh, well, just where do I even start? It's kind of, you're a bit overwhelmed with how much is out there in the moment and stuff like that. So,
I think if the goal ends up being powerlifting, it's definitely best to kind of touch base with a powerlifting coach or someone who's good with that.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I'll grab a general. So if you just want to kind of like build muscle, you're just getting started into the gym, or you're interested in building muscle as a goal. Yeah. I'll put a program in so we can at least have somewhere to go to anyway.
Yeah, and then something for the listeners out there, even just for to have a look at as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, even so typically, currently I don't follow, or I haven't followed like a program in such a long time, but I've got a lot of programs that I pull upon. Yep. And so I just find the things that I like from the different programs that I've done. Yeah. And so like my program now would always just end up looking like the previous programs that I've done, but just all the things that I like about the things that I've done in the past. Yeah. And so if I like certain movements, I'll keep those movements. A lot of programs will kind of give you the exposure to new movements or new kind of versions of sets and ways to do things that you might not have seen before. Yeah. And again, some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them you like, some of them you don't. Yeah. So you just pick the ones where you're like, oh, actually, I really like that. I'll add that to my program. I've been lifting for a while, like you even see just with different lifters, like, we've all got our proclivity to what we want, like we prefer to do certain exercises, and then we'll have a bit of strength in there, and then we'll go and train with someone else, and then they're doing one that they always do, and then we jump on like far out, like I smash you over there, but you smash me right here, because you become strong in the areas that you're comfortable in. Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's definitely good to get new programs or train with someone new to kind of expand that horizon and try some different things that you otherwise don't normally do. Yeah, because it really. Essentially, it's highlighting weaknesses, right? 100%. But once you find something that you enjoy, like definitely make that a bread and butter. And so, I mean, like in terms of, I don't think there would ever be a chest workout where I just wouldn't do an incline dumbbell press. Yeah. Like I just always do incline dumbbell press. I mix between the barbell and like if I'm trying to, because I am trying to get stronger now, I'm trying to do the Smith machine. Just to try and push a little harder, because I've been finding just because my back is still like not amazing when I'm throwing them up. And because I'm trying to do like 40s and stuff like that. So I struggle with that. If I've got a spotter, I'm pretty keen to do dumbbell because I love it. Like I still think it's better than Smith. I can feel it more. Do you know what I mean? And instead of like you're having to balance it, and instead of the Smith machine, I would find I'm pushing. And like I can push decent weight, but it's just not the same as the dumbbell for me as well. Actually, one thing I would say is if you have a goal in strength, and that is to kind of improve the bench press, I would just always do the bench press. Again, if you go back to specificity, the more versions of bench press that you do, the better you get at bench press. Yeah. And so if you really want to kind of push your strength and bench press over a short period of time, I would probably do like a standard bench. Yep. I'd do like a pause bench. I would do close grip bench. Wide grip. You should be okay wide grip, but I would go like an overhead military press with a barbell. Okay. Again, mainly because you're working the same, all the muscle groups that are going to be required in the bench, and the only reason I say close grip rather than wide grip is close grip, you end up hitting the triceps. Yep. And mainly that top part of that push is always going to be tricep anyway. So that lockout is going to be tricep. So you're strengthening that part of it as well. Pretty much. A normal bench. Yeah. Whereas wide grip, as long as you're kind of where you normally grab the bar, I would just do your regular bench at that grip. Yep. And then the pause is because essentially it's hard at the bottom. Yep. So it's really hard off the bottom. So you make that even harder by stopping. So you've got no momentum. And so again, it's similar to kind of like doing a sprint training, right? Like you do a sprint training because you're running faster than what you plan to run. Yeah. And that's made it harder.
Yeah.
Same with pause. The pause grip or the pause bench is basically the same thing. It's just made that bench press so much harder. And then you're using the overhead press and the close grip press to work the supplementary muscle groups, but still on the same bar. So that bar doesn't feel different.
Yeah.
Rather than necessarily just doing dumbbell and things.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So especially if it's a short period of time. Now, again, if you're looking to build strength over a longer period of time, won't make any difference because the muscle will still adapt.
Yeah.
But if you want to,
I'm probably in that sort of category. I'm not in a rush to build the strength.
I'd probably say 8 weeks or less.
Yeah.
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 So anything less than 8 weeks, I would be more specific than anything because it'll probably give you the best bang for buck return.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Similar with squat. So depending on the movements that you actually want to progress in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be specific if you want to hit a goal. It's much like if you want to...
Should I start squatting again with my back?
Well, okay. So
I've added in lunges and weighted lunges, and I have been finding them pretty good. Very nice. Like they're definitely killing my legs.
So definitely I would do a squat pattern. I don't think you need to do a barbell back squat, like a barbell bilateral back squat, which is just your standard squat. Like you probably don't need to do that so long as you get extra work in.
Well, like something like a goblet squat or a front.
Front like
squat.
a split squat. Front squat, definitely. Yep, you could do a front squat. Like the main
because there's less pressure on the back, right?
What would be the purpose from the squatting pattern? Is it to help with running and prevent injury? I just
want to grow my legs,
Right. Yeah, I mean, in that case, the squat tends to be good because it's often the thing that you can go the heaviest with.
Yeah.
So you've got more load on a given joint. So if you're not doing a squat, definitely a leg press.
Yeah.
Because it's probably the only other thing where you'll load up a hell of a lot of weight. In terms of keeping your knees safe and functional, you don't need a barbell squat.
Yeah.
Because you can do that on single joint exercises and like split squats and lunges and things like that, which will actually help probably more than just the barbell.
Yeah.
But the barbell is almost the king of the exercise for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's mainly because like there's no other exercise bar leg press that you'll put on 100 kilos onto the bar.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you think about what you do for a lunge, you probably use 20 kilo dumbbells. So even at that point, you've only got 40 kilos of weight. Double that out. It's still only 80 kilos of weight across 2 legs. You still put 100 kilos on a back squat bar.
Yeah.
So it does work from a size perspective because it's just that you can put a lot of force through.
Yeah.
But you don't need it to grow your legs.
Yeah.
And I would say if you're wanting it from a running perspective, there are better exercises than a back squat to do for running.
Yep.
Yeah. So it depends on the goal.
Cool. No, well, I reckon that's a good little sort of ending towards resistance training.
Yeah.
So do you want anything else to add?
No, I mean, just I guess if anyone does have any questions, flick them through.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can kind of touch base on how you've kind of found this next block of training and even merging of what that hybrid looks like from a recovery capacity standpoint in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys got some questions as well, just, definitely post them because we can give us some ideas for future podcasts, stuff like stuff that you might be interested in learning a bit more about. Because I feel like we go through some of these conversations and we're bringing up some sort of like how you talked about before with the specificity. Yeah,
specificity.
And like those sort of little terms that people might want to know a bit more about. So if they want to comment, and then we can swing back to them and just make a few notes, or maybe after we've got maybe 5 or 10 questions from the listeners, and we'll just run over them and
100%.
do another podcast on that.
Do like a quick fire.
Yeah,
100%, definitely.
Awesome.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening.